Support for Pop of Culture comes from Stallings Wealth Management. Daniel Stallings, financial advisor. Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC, a broker/dealer, and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity.
This week on Pop of Culture, Scott Simon has a new book about the role pets play in our lives. It's both funny and unexpectedly moving.
We'll also hear from the artistic director and principal conductor of Orchestra, Indiana. He has an original work in their next concert.
And we'll celebrate Mother's Day coming up.
Support for Pop of Culture comes from Stallings Wealth Management and from you. You may have heard about large gifts to NPR. Those donations are important, but they don't bring back the funding to IPR. Your support pays for the programs you rely on, especially local programs like this one, and the people, like me, who create them. Pop of Culture exists for you and because of you. Give today at indianapublicradio.org.
From Indiana Public Radio, this is Pop of Culture. I'm Jen Blackmer.
And I'm Kara DuQuette. Later this hour, we celebrate Mother's Day in the U.S. by going inside of Bones.
But before that, you know our first guest because he's Scott Simon. The voice of Weekend Edition Saturday has a new book out called Ulysses S. Cat and Other Animals I Have Known. And he joins us now. Welcome to Pop of Culture, Scott.
Very good to be with you. Thanks so much, Jen.
Well, throughout your book, you refer to our animal friends as running mates, which is a term which has a lot of connotations, as you know. Where does that term come from?
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that because I initially wrote most of the book under the assumption that would be the title. Mm-hmm. And then my fine publisher said, nah, people will think it's political. We can't do that. Running mates, they take us through life. They're alongside. They're under our arms. They are often on our pillows, alongside of us at all stages of our lives. They share so much with us and we with them. They're running mates. We take each other through life.
Yeah, they really do. And we learned so much about the running mates in your life. And in fact, there is a full-on society, not just of running mates, but a full-on society of beings that resides on your porch, a community that your older daughter refers to as the Slimans. So who exactly are the Slimans?
The Slimans, and I defer to my older daughter's creativity in that one, is the worm, the community of worms that we keep on our balcony. It's a worm bin. It was my wife's idea. And each and every worm, I don't mind telling you, is named after a local public radio station.
Yes, I got that.
and including IPR. So, you know, I lift the bin with my wife every now and then, and I say, hello, KQED, hello, WBUR, hello, WBEZ, hello, IPR, hello, WHYY, and they wiggle back. And I must say, I was not keen on this idea, but I've become very fond of the worms. It's hard not to develop some feelings of attachment for them. And, you know, and I mean, we feed them leftovers. And the worms sometimes taunt me by saying, oh, yes, we might be slimy, but really, Scott, what are you doing for the environment? Because worms do a lot for our environment, of course.
Absolutely. And the conversations that you have with your worms and with your animal friends, you really do a lovely job in this piece of talking about that relationship and this tension, I guess, that we feel to either anthropomorphize the animals and maybe think for them. But you describe this communication form as almost a literary process, right? Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, because I think it is a literary process in the sense that we empathize, we impute, we infer, and we create dialogue in a language we can understand, just as, you know, we have to communicate with them in a language they can understand. I think, Jen, you might be referring to the fact that what can I tell you? It's a special responsibility I have in life. I am our animal's interpreter.
Yes, exactly.
So, for example, when we are walking, my wife and I are walking our French poodle Daisy along the river in the morning. Daisy just goes wild about human attention, human companionship, and she just begins to jump, and people begin to pet her. And I will speak for Daisy and having her say, oh, I'm cute, huh? I know I am cute, huh? You think I am cute? You will pet me, huh? Oh, does that feel good? Does that feel good? My wife, who is French, finds my representation of Daisy's French accent to be inauthentic. Well, she's entitled to her opinion. Our family was out in California a couple of years ago, and at a barn, because our oldest daughter is very much works in barns. They met a pet psychic, and who worked with horses, horse psychic, I guess we should say. And so our daughters thrust Daisy into her arms. It must be said, according to them, Daisy was immediately relaxed and at ease in their arms. And they said to the pet psychic, ask Daisy what she thinks about the voice that our father does for her. And the pet psychic leaned against Daisy's forehead and leaned back and said, well, Daisy says it obviously doesn't sound like her, but your father enjoys it, so she doesn't mind. That is such a brilliant answer, and I think it might also be true.
It's very true, and I mean, for our listeners, Daisy is a French poodle. Yes.
Yes.
So of course
that's why she would have the accent. Just as we had a cat previously named Leona who had been in the household of 3 interns at the British Embassy, and then when they left, went through a bathroom window, was discovered in the alley. The agreement we made between the British Embassy is that we would take on Leona, who was ours for, I think, 14 years, but we had to rear her as a British cat.
Of course.
And we took this very seriously. We put pictures of David Beckham over her food bowl. We tried to observe Boxing Day.
She's a Man United fan, apparently.
Yes. I would get Man United banners for her when we would travel overseas. And I must say, my wife being French, there was a little War of the Roses tension at first. But they got over that. And of course, I would help Leona communicate in the morning. Caroline would say, well, Leona, darling, are you hungry? And Leona would say, right. Oh, little scratch over here, please. Leona would call her French lady. I should explain to one of the most touching, because as you know, this book ranges all around. I talk about pets during the siege of Sarajevo.
Yes, absolutely. Marjan
the lion in the Kabul zoo during that particular war. But I'm still moved when I think about our late cat Leona. It was when our daughters were much younger, and she would see each of us off into slumber every night. We would take our youngest daughter, Paulina, into her bedroom, and Leona would go in there and curl up with her until she fell asleep. A little while later, half an hour later, we'd take our older daughter, Elise, in. Leona would curl up with her until Elise had fallen asleep. And then finally, Leona would come out and curl up with us as Caroline and I read or watched something. And then we would bring her in our arms to go off to slumber together.
Yeah, the animals are so important in all aspects of our lives. And you mentioned the Sarajevo and Kabul, and you even mentioned Mississippi after Katrina. And how do these stories of these less than ideal circumstances inform our everyday interactions with the animals in our lives?
Well, I think these unfortunate, these tragic circumstances of war and loss make us realize that the animals in our lives are part of our family. I don't mean to compare them to any other member of the family, but we cherish them. We don't want to say goodbye. And, the laws were changed. Evacuation orders were changed following Katrina because they realized a lot of people in Louisiana and Mississippi just would not evacuate or evacuated against their better feelings because they didn't want to abandon their animals. And so now evacuation orders have been changed so that you can bring along reasonably sized animals. And I think that just recognizes the obvious. They are members of the family. They're part of our lives. And to keep our own humanity going, we keep them in our lives, often under our arms and in our laps.
Absolutely. It is such a delightful read. And as you say, you move us from these moments of joy to moments perhaps not as much. I kind of felt, Scott, as I was reading the book, that I should be reading it aloud to my own pets. I have two huskies who watch over me in very much the same way you just described.
That sounds like they sound like they'd be a good audience.
I know they would, actually.
And they'd probably enjoy chewing on the book when the reading was over. I hope that'll help sales. I've been told the book is very toothsome. So
it very well might. And Scott, what a pleasure this conversation has been this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Pleasure to talk to you, Jen. Thank you.
Scott Simon is the host of Weekend Edition Saturday. He has a new book out called Ulysses S. Cat and Other Animals I Have Known, available now.
Orchestra Indiana is the combined talents of the Muncie Symphony Orchestra and the Marion Philharmonic Orchestra. They merged in 2022, and last year, Yaniv Segal became the artistic director and principal conductor. You can hear and see his work at a concert this weekend. But before he takes the conductor's podium, he sat down with IPR's Casey Alexander.
First of all, it's so nice to have you here, Mr. Segal.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about your past, like how you got here and why you chose Orchestra Indiana over somewhere else.
Wow, that's a long-winded question, perhaps, but thanks for having me. The path through a arts career is very varied and not a straight line. So I started out very young playing violin. My mother is a musician, retired violinist from the New York Philharmonic. My father is a violin maker. And so I didn't have much choice, I suppose. Although my sister managed to escape. She played a little piano growing up, and now she's an artist, but not a musician. And so always growing up with music all around. I sang at the Metropolitan Opera as a kid. I then got really lucky to win a role on the first national tour of The Secret Garden and toured for a year when I was 11, turned 12 on the road in Detroit. I was even in Indianapolis for, I think, a week sometime in 1992. It was a long time ago. I did some more theatrical stuff in New York as well, but I never stopped playing violin. My violin was on tour with me, and my mom was teaching me. And I also wrote music from a young age. So just, lots of creative things. Then sometime in college, my path turned more towards conducting. I think that for a lot of people, me included, practicing is a struggle. And I think I started to love the violin more when I didn't have to practice many, many hours a day. And I loved the conducting nature of music is communication, is involving people and bringing what I think is some of the greatest works of art to life. And so I really found that was the way I was gravitating. And so I started conducting, still composing. Eventually, I went to the University of Michigan, where I did graduate degrees in both conducting and composition. And, since then have had great opportunities. I was the assistant conductor of the Naples Philharmonic in Florida. I worked as the assistant of the Detroit Symphony. I've guest conducted all around the States and abroad as well. Both my parents are immigrants, so I've worked in Europe a fair amount. The nature of orchestras right now in this country is pretty remarkable. Like, there are orchestras everywhere, and the level of musicians is really high. And my mother came to hear one of my concerts somewhere in the States. I don't remember where it was. And maybe New York can be a little bit insular, and the New York Philharmonic especially can be insular. And she said to me, in all seriousness, wow, you can make good music anywhere. And I think, she meant that as a compliment, and just to say, I don't think she realized anymore, because she just, played with one of the best groups in the world for so long with the best artists, that you can have quality experiences everywhere, and you want to have those experiences in local places. And so I, for the past couple of years, have been the music director of an orchestra in Salina, Kansas. I'm on faculty at the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings, which is an incredible strings institute attached to Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And as of this year, I'm now the music director here in Muncie. And, the job popped up, and I thought, oh, this looks creative. They're looking, Orchestra Indiana combined 2 orchestras. They're looking to communicate with the community in a new way. And I sent in my application and was lucky enough to pass the, I'll call it an inspection, but maybe it was an audition. You come in for a week, you do a concert, you meet the board and stuff like that. And I was lucky enough to get this job. And so here we are.
That's awesome. I do agree with you that you can really make good music anywhere, especially out here in the Midwest. So for your upcoming show, In Search of Destiny, you open with an original composition. What can you tell me about your piece, The Light That Breathes?
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about this. Also, it's my birthday on the 9th. So
hey.
I get to open the concert with my own music. When I got the job and was told to, design a season, I said, is it okay if I include some of my own music? I don't want to push that on anybody. And they said, absolutely, you can do that. And then when we decided to collaborate with Taylor University on their chorale for the final concert, went up to visit the university campus. And one of the spaces that Reed Spencer, their choral director, showed me is this atrium in their science building. And I was like, wow, this is an amazing space. I can't wait to hear this is going to be unusual. It'll be breaking that fourth wall. And it's a very reverberant space. And I said, do you think I could do my piece that I wrote last year that uses bells placed all around the audience? And in a space like this, you're going to have an amazing acoustic. And they said, absolutely. So this piece got its idea in 2 different phases. The first was during the pandemic when I was stuck at home and thinking about ways to write music. We thought, okay, people have to be separated. Maybe the audience will be in the middle and the orchestra will be around. So I was already thinking of this idea of 360 space and call and response from different sections. So I had a couple of ideas written down from that time period. And then fast forward a few years later, and I read this book by Daniel Mason called Northwoods, which is a dynamite book. I mean, it really inspired me to think about space, a place through time. Many times in books, you follow characters, and instead he follows the space. The book talked about this this early growth of a plant called a cotyledon. Some plants have this embryonic leaf. Like if you think of a pea shoot, for example, you have that little shoot with the 2 leaves, and those leaves nourish the seed early on and enable the plant to grow, but then it absorbs those leaves and that stem, and they disappear. So I thought about this idea of how we absorb things into us and we come out different. You may not see those things anymore, but they become a part of the piece. So the piece is all about organic growth from one idea that transforms into another and transforms into another and so on and so forth, and eventually kind of celebrates the fact that light, the energy that we get from the sun, that goes into the plants, that goes into the animals, that goes into us, is what enables life to exist.
Nice. So how does that original piece really set the tone for the rest of the program? Because I know the rest of it's pretty classical stuff, but how does that set the tone there?
So I think bookended, since we start with my piece, which is very much about nature and growth, and melody not so much. It's much more about a sound piece. And then we end with Debussy's Nocturnes, which is one of the earliest examples of a work that is about description of place and creating sound worlds that are very unique. I think that that is why I wanted to pair those 2 on the outside, on the bookends of the program. And then the other ones explore destiny, fate, interaction with nature. So we're kind of, on the edge of what we know and what we don't know. And some of the texts in some of the poems that were set to song, like the Vaughan Williams Toward the Unknown Region, Walt Whitman is somebody who's really known for writing about nature and place, and the poem is really about what is in the great beyond. So I think nature is a tying theme throughout, and also, I was also thinking just musically about things that would sound great in that resonant space.
Yeah, speaking of sounding great in that resonant space, I mean, the Brahms, I can only imagine that powerful choir part in Gesang der Parzen. Like I've never worked with a choir before in an orchestra before, but I've heard choirs and orchestras, and I think they add so much. How do you bring out the best in a choir?
I had the privilege of stopping in yesterday to hear their rehearsal. They're fantastic. And that was, you kind of don't know early on when you get a new job what your partnerships are going to be like. And I was hoping for something good, and I was even more surprised by how they sound and their preparation. So the sound of singers in that space is one of the reasons I chose the space, and that Reed Spencer suggested it. And in Brahms, he makes the orchestra sound so rich, and now add the human voice and the harmony, and I think that we're just going to be wrapped up in gorgeous sound.
Yeah. So you are working with the fantastically talented Laura-Lee Songer in the alto Rhapsody. Can you talk about what she adds to that piece and to the orchestra as a whole?
Yeah, so we also just met. I mean, we've met on before, but we just met yesterday to go over the song, and I almost had nothing to say to her. Just she was so delightful, and she actually apologized. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've been singing all day, and my voice is shot," and I couldn't believe it. She's got a gorgeous instrument.
Nice. And then how does ending on that impressionistic note impact the narrative, and how do you want people to walk away from this program?
Is it my job to decide how they walk away?
No, but how do you walk away from this program?
We're all privileged. I mean, as a musician, sometimes you get caught up in the technical aspects or the preparation or the practice or the rehearsal. But I think it's really important to remember, and you're a young performer, that you're also allowed to be inspired, and that the act of performing and living that experience is really important for shaping us as a human being and for the audience as human beings. I think what's amazing about live music is that you could be sitting next to somebody else and have completely different takeaways. And it depends on many things, maybe what you had for breakfast, maybe what type of day you've had getting to the hall, small annoyances, or maybe it reminds you of something. There are so many ways to experience a concert. What I think my goal is as a performer is to create a space where people are allowed to disconnect from the rest of what is a very sometimes busy or stressful or seemingly life with no quiet moments, with our cell phones dinging, with the notifications, with so many things going on at all times. When you come to a concert, it's a form of meditation. You should put away the phone. You should put away that outside world and allow yourself to listen. And if we do that, whatever you take away is that valid experience. If it means you need to just relax for a little bit, great. If it means, wow, I loved that, I'm going to go practice my flute because I want to do that. That's also great. There's no ultimate goal, like specific ultimate goal, other than to have an experience for everybody.
Very nice. And when can people experience this?
Our concert this week is at 7:30 at Taylor University. You can get tickets at the door or on the Orchestra Indiana's website. I would say the campus is undergoing some construction right now, so parking is a little bit more complicated, and you might have a little bit of a walk to the science atrium. So if you're coming, go ahead and plan early, and we would love to have a full house.
The good news is that Saturday, the weather is supposed to be lovely.
Awesome.
And so being in nature for a little bit longer can't hurt anybody.
And then we'll bring the nature right into the concert hall and connect that as well. It's a beautiful campus.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us,
Great to be here.
Mr. Segal. We really appreciated the interview.
Thanks.
Yaniv Segal is director of Orchestra Indiana. I'm Casey Alexander.
Welcome back to Pop of Culture. I'm Jen Blackmer. And today we're happy to bring you another installment of our series, Beautiful Things, in conjunction with River Teeth Journal of Nonfiction Narrative. And today I am so happy to be speaking with author Kelly McMasters. Hello, Kelly.
Hi, Jen. Thanks so much.
Kelly is an author of 2 memoirs, The Leaving Season and Welcome to Shirley. And today she's going to be sharing with us her beautiful thing called The Inside of Bones.
Thanks, Jen. The Inside of Bones. His small voice cuts a jagged line into the not quite morning quiet. My body reflexively lifts out of bed, finds its way over the piles of tiny cars and books, through the stone darkness of our new apartment, our first without his father. I steer myself into the bedroom he shares with his younger brother, find his bed, crawl in. "Mama," he repeats, softer this time. His eyes are wide and staring. What's inside my bones? His body is taut beneath his duvet, and the nightlight hollows his eyes gray. He is 5. He loves ABBA, the beauty of photosynthesis, the number 0. I murmur about minerals and marrow, picturing the mealy silt sealed inside his spindle legs. He is small for his age, can't yet tip the old brass scale past 38 pounds at swim lessons. He is sharp-edged, ungraceful. Holding him feels like putting my arms around a folding chair. My hand rests on his sternum, thrumming with his heartbeat. He lightly moves it away. He weighs what I've given him, fragments about blood cells and tissue, but it's enough for now. His body relaxes beside me, and his breathing goes hard, like his brother's across the room. I stare at him as the light shifts through the blinds. The translucent skin on his eyelids gives a faint ripple, the thin purple branches of blood vessels pulsing like a secret between us. What's inside your bones, sweet boy? I am.
What a lovely, lovely piece, Kelly. Thank you so much for the piece and the great reading.
Thank you so much.
This is when I first read this a couple of days ago, I was struck by the moments, right? And I have 3 kids, and I just think back to all of these private moments that I had with them, middle of the night, early morning, sitting in a chair together, or these things that are kind of stamped onto my own soul that only I know. And this your piece really allowed me to recall some of those.
Oh, thank you. I mean, there are so many of those private moments, and one of the heartbreaks of motherhood, I think, is that my son would never remember that. Right?
Yes.
That's private between us, and yet it's all mine.
Yeah. Yeah. And you share it so beautifully. I think that, I'll ask you the usual question I begin. I think it's probably a little obvious, but what inspired this piece for you?
So this piece came after we had I had just left my marriage, and I took my 2 kids and moved to a completely new town where I knew nobody. We knew nobody. I had a new job, and we were in this beautiful and yet decrepit old horse stable of an apartment.
Yeah.
And we were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and everything in those first few months felt, I realized, exactly like that moment, just sort of dark and quiet and lonely.
Yeah.
I felt through him in that question a lot of the things that I was feeling in that period. And so that was sort of what made me sit down and catalog that moment.
Those questions in particular that our kids ask in these moments are so simple, but they're so revealing. Like this idea of what's in my bones, right? It's such a lovely question. And for him, I'm sure it was just thinking about my bones right now.
Yes, middle of the night, big questions for a little boy.
Yeah.
And, I'd been looking at him and his physicality in a particular way at that time, because in that moment, they both of my children seemed just so physically vulnerable more than at any other moment. And looking at him, throwing his body into the water at swim lessons at the Y every week. And we had this giant brass scale. It was beautiful at the Y. And every week he would stand on it, hoping that he would make that arrow point higher. And 38 pounds. I mean, I think my groceries that I bought yesterday, 38 pounds, right? And I also wondered, how are we going to get through this? You're so small. How can I protect you?
Yeah.
And I felt like his question, what's in my bones? The only thing I knew was that I was there and I was going to help us as much as possible get through this next part.
Yeah. Holding him feels like putting my arms around a folding chair. That image is so wonderfully specific. And as our kids grow, they're kind of growing into their physical selves as well, which can be difficult for them. And so that in particular was very revealing about what you just spoke of.
Thank you. I think a lot of motherhood for me was spent feeling like I was doing something wrong or feeling the wrong thing and not knowing how to do something as simple as hold my child. Sometimes felt like a failure. And I think a lot of what I explore in my book, The Leaving Season, and this part of this section did end up going into that book, really talks about the loneliness of motherhood when you do think, and what I understand now is it's pretty universal, you do think you're doing it wrong. And
all the time.
Every
day, right?
But I was so on my own in that period that I didn't have anyone really to check that with.
Mm-hmm.
And, soon after I did come into this beautiful community of other mothers, and that really helped. But at that moment, the reason I included that line is because it really did, that image occurred to me, and it felt almost wrong to confess that that's what holding my child felt like.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's not a comfortable image, right?
No, no, it's not. And it felt like a confession in this small flash piece.
Right. Right. He loves Abba, the beauty of photosynthesis, and the number 0. The miracle of life comes to us through these vulnerable bodies that you talked about earlier, with these very large questions like the number 0. There have been books written about that.
Exactly. And what you said earlier about those sort of middle of the night child questions and the way they are interpreting the world. And I think he could really have meant literally, what is inside my bone? This is mine and I can't see it. Can you help me understand how I work?
Right. Yeah.
And that sort of larger, in that beauty of 0, right? The larger questions of the universe. What's inside me? And I realized I know so little about my world.
Right. Yes.
I often didn't know the answer. And so I would try and, muddle through it. And this was one of those examples of my muddling where I'm trying to remember, 8th grade biology.
Right.
He bought it for a period. I could tell it wasn't exactly what he wanted, or it wasn't enough, but it was enough for the moment.
Exactly. Yes. And our kids reveal to us what we know, but also what we don't know. And it's this amazing sort of contradiction that we rest in when we're parents, in remembering that we're not complete. They think we are, but we're not. And how do we negotiate that with them on a daily basis, I think? Kelly McMasters is the author of 2 memoirs, The Leaving Season and Welcome to Shirley, and co-editor of Wanting, Women Writing About Desire, and This is the Place, Women Writing About Home. A former bookstore owner, she teaches at Hofstra University and lives in New York. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks so much.
This story comes from IPR's collaboration with River Teeth's Beautiful Things, a weekly magazine of micro essays. More at riverteethjournal.com.
This week for What Are You Working On?, we hear from a painter.
My name is Maya Das, and today on WAYWO, I have Nia Thomas, a painting major at Ball State. Nia, how are you?
Hi, I'm good.
So glad to have you with us today. Nia, what are you working on?
I'm working on a 22 by 30 just sheet of paper, and I am currently painting like a night scene. I'm going in with gouache, and I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more saturated, so I'm starting off with a bunch of like brighter colors and hoping to layer a lot of darker tones in over it.
That sounds beautiful. So when you're working with gouache, how would you explain that paint to our listeners?
Yeah, so gouache, I would consider it to be a mix between like watercolor, like an acrylic. It's kind of like in between type of paint. It can be really transparent, or you can also build up a lot of layers and have it be more pigmented or opaque. So
that's awesome. With your night scene, what colors are you using?
I'm just working with like oranges, reds. I'm really just getting that underpainting for worked on. So
that's exciting. And then what class is this for?
It's for narrative painting.
And you said narrative painting is a more open medium class. Have you enjoyed getting to explore different forms of paint for different projects?
Yeah, it's been really fun to have that open. I've been working with gouache as like an underpainting, and I think I did my first painting in open acrylic, which is like a slow drying acrylic paint. And then I think for the most recent 2, I've done oil paint. So
what would you say is your favorite?
I would say oil paint for sure.
And I remember you bringing up that you had done some wax painting. Is it called encaustics?
Yes, encaustics, yeah.
How was that?
Oh my gosh, it's such a fun experience. It's so different. As a medium, it's like there's like such a large learning curve when working with it. It's a new medium for me, so I'm still learning it. But for me, I feel like it was best to work fast because it dries so quickly. But the pigment and the color variations and just the process of working with it is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
When it came to some of the pieces you had made with the wax painting process, one that really stood out to me was the octopus, because it had lots of little textured marks. How did you go about making something like that?
While I was in the encaustics class, I was also in a printmaking class. And so my theme in the printmaking class was more marine life or like sea life. And so I pretty much just referenced a sketch that I use for printmaking. I think I started off with wanting to do more saturated tones. I feel like with sea life, there's like so much opportunity to use like brighter colors.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I started out with some sort of wash, like a dark green. I did like greens, reds, and orange is my favorite color. So I did the octopus orange, of course. But yeah, I laid out the background, and then I started off with a sketch, but I laid out the background, left in the spaces for the color of the octopus, and
which is like a vibrant yellow and orange.
Yeah, it's got like a really rich, like warm tone to it. I used reds, oranges, yellows.
And for our listeners, you can kind of see the octopus's head and body, and then there's like these twirling tentacles, and you can see all the suction cups. And she did a really beautiful job laying details on with the wax. Would you say that was one of the more challenging mediums that you found rewarding, or what was your favorite kind of class that had a learning curve?
Yeah, I would definitely say encaustics for sure. Yeah, I had never worked with like a medium like comparable to it, especially in the process of like having to work within a time frame of the pigment drying. And so for me, it was so fun to have to work fast and really lock in and put in my attention into what I was working on. So
I thought that your work really shone through that medium because your paintings are abstracted and colorful and vibrant. And for some reason with the wax, I felt like it just really embodied that vibe really well.
Yeah.
Other works of yours I really loved, which you did do an encaustic self-portrait, but I've loved your painting self-portraits. Can you talk to us about what inspires what you paint and why you paint what you do?
I feel like in the creative world, I'm inspired by just the mundane of everyday life. I feel like it really just depends.
That's what I love about artistic people, though.
Yeah, so a lot of my different paintings kind of reflect like a time and place of when I've had different experiences or different spaces that have made me sort of like reflect. I feel like it's very experimental. I feel like it's really a space for me to sort of like emotionally process like life experiences, but also just like environmental aspects of like places that I immerse myself into. I do a lot of paintings of my mom also because she's very close to me. I also do a lot of things that are relative to like me personally in a very mundane way, like kind of like a day-to-day, but things that cause me to reflect in a sense. Yeah.
Nia, what is one of your favorite pieces you've ever created?
One of my favorite pieces I've ever made is titled Apartment Life. I would describe it as a sort of like dystopian space that has really rich like red tones and yellow tones. I painted the sort of ominous sort of red and orange sky with these two buildings on the left and right side of the painting. In the center are these really pretty flowers that sort of, they kind of like make a path in between these buildings. And I had a lot of fun making this painting. I feel like I used a lot of different techniques like impasto and dry brushing, and it was one of my first experiences using acrylic. I had been more experienced with using watercolor, but after taking the materials class, I felt like I was a little bit more comfortable using it. And so there's just so many different pretty details that I included in this, and I feel like it's just really interesting. I felt like the process of making it was a lot of fun, and I feel like it definitely reflected just my life at the time, just being new to even living in an apartment, and just everyday actions, having that as sort of like a reflection. And
I think that's beautiful. I love that piece as well. If our listeners wanted to see your artwork for themselves, where could they go?
Yeah, so you could follow me on Instagram. My tag is Golden Glow with 3 N's and 2 O's. That's my main platform.
That's amazing. Yeah. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy student schedule to come talk with me, Nia.
Yeah, thank you. This has been such a great opportunity to even talk about my art. So.
The weekend after graduation is always a quiet time, but there's still plenty to do in East Central Indiana, Kara.
Yep.
This is the Arts Calendar. Orchestra Indiana's next concert, In Search of Destiny, is on Saturday, May 9th. It starts with an original work from artistic director Yaniv Segal, who you heard earlier in today's show, titled The Light That Breathes. It will set the stage for a powerful exploration of purpose and transcendence. The concert takes place at Euler Science Complex at Taylor University, again on Saturday, May 9th. The search begins at 7:30 p.m.
Also, on Saturday, May 9th, the Delaware County Master Gardener Association will have their annual spring plant sale. Browse through a wide selection of trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals, and more.
Flowers everywhere.
Yes.
It's the last weekend to take in Flowers Forever at the Indiana State Museum, where flowers are everywhere. Painted, framed in patterns, bunched into bouquets, this exhibit of art and artifacts explores the nuances of floral motifs in art and design across time. Tickets can be arranged at indianamuseum.org.
And we'll have more on another floral function in just a moment. This Wednesday, learn about lesser-known Indiana artist Constance Coleman Richardson. The director of Ball State School of Art and Pop of Culture alum, Dr. Laura Kuykendall, will lead a tea and talk at Minnetrista Museum and Gardens. She'll talk about Richardson's place in art history and why rediscovering overlooked artistic voices matters in present day. This Wednesday, May 13th at 3 p.m. Pre-registration is preferred. More information at minnetrista.org/events.
Also, don't forget that Mother's Day is Sunday. Mom, looking ahead on our calendar, we have several events for next weekend, including Art in Bloom, again, more flowers, at the David Owsley Museum of Art, or DOMA. This annual celebration of innovative floral creations is open to the public Saturday, May 16th and Sunday, May 17th, with extended museum hours. There's also a preview party next Friday, May 15th from 5 to 7 p.m. Get a first look at this year's arrangements along with music, tasty beverages, TM, and hors d'oeuvres. Event details are at bsu.edu/DOMA.
Also next weekend, an opportunity to do some arts and crafts. There will be a zines workshop at the Eagles Theater in Wabash. Zines are handmade, self-published mini magazines rooted in underground art culture. The content inside can be anything. Supplies will be provided. This workshop is Saturday, May 16th. It's open to the public, but space is limited. Learn more at honeywellarts.org.
God, zines takes me back.
Oh, yeah.
Zines takes me back to, I don't know, when I was a teenager, rebellious teenager. And finally, Muncie Ballet will present Oz the Ballet. This adventurous show is filled with dancing and a rainbow of costumes, of course, and is intended for the full family. The ballet commences at Cornerstone Center for the Arts on Friday, May 15th at 7 p.m. and Saturday, May 16th at 2 p.m. Tickets can be found at Berrywinkle Frozen Yogurt and Rosebud Coffee House.
If you have something adventurous for our arts calendar, dance your fingers along the keyboards to indianapublicradio.org/contact and then click Pop of Culture.
Support for Pop of Culture comes from Stallings Wealth Management and from you. You may have heard about large gifts to NPR. Those donations are important, but they don't bring back the funding to IPR. Your support pays for the programs you rely on, especially local programs like this one, and the people, like me, who create them. Pop of Culture exists for you and because of you. Give today at indianapublicradio.org.
And that's our show. Our interim general manager and executive producer is Angie Grimes.
This week was produced by Luke Jones, who for Mother's Day this year will give his mother the gift of leaving her alone so she can finish her book.
Aww. We had production assistance from Andrew Montavon.
Our audio fellow is Maya Doss, and our show was hosted by me, Jen Blackmer.
And me, Kara DuQuette. Pop of Culture is a production from IPR on the flowery campus of Ball State University.